Okay, recording in progress. Yay!
Yay.
Ximena. Ximena. I got it right.
Yes. Yes, you
I am
did.
like, it's so important to me to get the name right. And so I write it down in my phonetic. Ximena Vengoechea.
You got it.
Oh my God.
Nice.
It's such a beautiful name.
Thank
So
you.
Ximena and I have known each other for a few years now. We both worked at the same company. I still work there, Pinterest. And when I first started, had just written your first book and it was not published yet, is what I remember. You were a researcher and you were going to be taking a lot of the methodology that you had learned through research, and you wrote your first book. And now we're together to talk about your second book, which is beautiful, called Rest Easy. And I'm holding it up for those few of you that actually watch this on YouTube so you can see the beauty of this book. But I'm so excited to talk to you about so many elements of it, but I would love to know from you, how did you come into this second book? And if you want to tell us about your first book too, like tell us a little bit about your author's journey.
Okay, sure. Author's journey. Well, I guess it starts in second grade when I knew I
Oh
wanted
my
to
God,
be a
yes.
writer.
That's where I wanted to start too. Little you, who, by the way, from this book, I learned was so organized as a 5-year-old
Yes,
that you
yes.
threw your own birthday party, which
So the family lore goes, I don't remember it, but it sounds right.
I can imagine list making.
Yes.
Okay, so second grade, you're starting to write. And what were you writing then? Who were you?
It's funny because I still have this notebook. Mrs. Pecora used to have us all do some journaling exercises, I guess, or stories. I think I was writing about like dinosaurs, stuff that like I'm not really a dinosaur person. I'm not like a sci-fi person. I'm like nowhere near that. But at the time, I was writing stories about a dinosaur going to the shopping mall. That was one that I remember. And yeah, all sorts of things. And I would leave little notes for my teacher too. Like I hope you like this one, that kind of thing.
Already ready to
So
like try to win over an editor. You were
already
like,
looking
let
for
me,
validation.
yes. Like if they like me more, they may read what I have to write.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
Amazing. And so then fast forward, you're going through school, you're going through college.
Yeah.
I assume you're writing, but did you sort of continue to maintain your written voice, or like
I
what
mean,
was
really
that?
what happened is that I got tired of it. Like I sort of like exhausted myself. I was super into journalism in high school and I was at one of those high schools that like cared a lot about, the newspaper and yearbook, and I was editor in chief, and like it was like
And where
award winning.
was
Like it was
this?
like very intense. It was on Staten Island, Curtis High
Okay.
School.
Okay.
Shout out Curtis Warriors. Although I don't know if they're called the Warriors anymore. That might have changed. But yeah, so I kind of overdid it, like got my journalism fill, and then was like, I absolutely don't want to do that. Um, so I stopped writing for a while, like in college, definitely, because also just all the paper writing. But I was
And the
still,
journalism Phil was like, this isn't filling me up. I'm not excited to
yeah.
track down the latest story on this topic.
No, I sort of, I mean, I was like a very jaded, like, freshman in college. It was like, been there, done that. Like, I don't need to do that now.
Relatable.
Like,
Relatable.
I already did that in high school, which is so silly, but is what felt true at the time.
Wait, are you sure you're not Gen X like I am? There's so many times that things come up and I'm like, I'm so Gen X. Like I really
uh,
like just disaffected youth, like know it all.
I guess I'm technically an elder millennial.
There
So
you go.
there's
Maybe it's
that.
that cusp.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, but I still was always interested in writing, even if I wasn't doing it. I was a literature major, so reading a lot, doing that in a couple different languages. That was kind of the core requirement, which I loved. And then I
Wait,
think
which languages were you?
Spanish was my primary focus, and then I did a little bit of German. But like really,
Wow.
by the end of college, I wanted to. I was doing a thing you're not supposed to do, which is reading in translation, because I had discovered that I really liked French like art history and literature, but it was too late for me to switch over. So
I
yeah, there
felt the
was a
same
lot
about
of,
German literature, by the way.
oh,
I was
nice.
like, I have to learn how to do this in order to read some of my favorite writers. Like, I really
Mm-hmm.
don't want to.
Mm-hmm.
That is so, but you were so academic, right? Like everything you're describing, I'm like, this is a very academic, somebody who loves learning and
Yes.
reading all these books in different languages. And yeah,
Yes. I think that's true. Yeah, for sure. Um, but I think also college kind of like burned me out on a certain type of, it was like high school burnt me out on journalistic writing. College burnt me out on like academic writing, at least for a little bit. And it wasn't until probably like 4 years after I graduated from college was when I started writing again in earnest. And I just, there was this little website called Medium that had recently launched. And I was starting to transition into the startup world and kind of trying to figure that out. And after a sort of failed attempt, I thought I wanted to be an academic. And so I was in a grad program. And then, a couple years in was like, actually don't want to do that. So, I was in the middle of this career pivot. And that I think seeing in particular in the startup world, as there's a lot of sharing of mistakes, sharing of like lessons learned, kind of, I don't know. I think there's a really healthy transparency in terms of uh, sharing of experiences that could be useful to other people. And so I was consuming a lot of that of like, what's a product manager? How do I do that? Like, just like that was kind of my education. And I just hit a certain point where I felt like I had something to say that could be useful, like as I was kind of taking all of this information up. And that sort of opened it, that was
and do
kind
you
of the
remember the
very
first
beginning.
thing that you felt like you had to say? Like, what was it? What was your early?
Yeah, I remember it mostly because it felt like such a fluke because it got picked up by the Medium's like editorial team and like featured in, I don't know, their newsletter or something. It was called, it's still there, Side Projects or the New Resume.
I love it.
And
Great title.
it was just, it was like this thing that I was
It's
observing
true,
of
by
like,
the way.
wow,
It's completely
like,
true.
yeah. And I had no idea. I was like, what, a side project? Like until I did. And then it felt like that was a thing that I could share. So yeah, that was kind of the beginning or the continuation of this thing that I'd always enjoyed, just applied in this different way.
And the interesting thing about that original piece is it's something that it's you articulating something that's happening that hasn't probably been quite articulated yet. Like definitely that was true, but no one was saying it in that way. Do you think that I mean, from what I see of your work, that feels like a special skill of yours, like tapping into what's happening and articulating it like, yeah, that is what's going on here. Thank you. Contextualizing.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of what I'm doing is trying to communicate insights of some kind. And insights feels like too heavy a word. That's kind of like the researcher in me is like thinks of insight, but it's
Me
something
too.
that I'm observing, making sense of, something that I have found personally useful. And the writing part is part of how I'm processing it. Like that art point of articulation is happening for me too as I'm writing the
Same.
thing.
Same.
It's my like way of synthesizing things,
Yes.
and then sharing it out. And with any luck, you do that a little bit ahead of the curve, like before before there's been too many think pieces or before it's been defined or whatever. But yeah, if nothing else, then I find it to be a useful thought, like thinking process.
So skipping ahead, listen like you mean it, which again, if you're watching the video, you can see it over the shoulder. It's also so well designed. I mean, you've got that design
Thank you.
instinct in your feedback and your partnering with your design team. But how did that one come to be?
Yes. So that book is all about how you can improve your listening skills, really with the end goal of building better relationships. And I guess there were a few things that were happening. I'm just someone who has always been interested in people and their stories. I think part of that is, the part that's just always been naturally drawn to story in general, right? Like to fiction, to understanding character, to all of those things, which made me that literature major. And I think also growing up, I'm one of four girls. So there's always things happening at home. I'm first gen American, so always kind of observing cultural differences. So I just had these, I was just naturally curious about, people and their stories. And I find conversation compelling. Like I am just a person who, yeah, if given the choice, I think it's like if you've ever done the love languages, it's like, I love quality time. Like I love chatting with you. So I was I felt very lucky when I discovered the role of user researcher, because it's a role I had no idea existed, but essentially involves talking to people like all day long about a very targeted set of questions. But you get to meet basically perfect strangers, and you have an hour with them, and you can stay on the surface or you can go deep. Like I've talked to people about like their finances and like their financial goals and their coupon usage or cooking, like all sorts of things. So in any case, I had learned a lot of lessons through that experience as a user researcher, things that I think were intuitive to someone who is naturally already interested in listening, but also things that made me a better listener just by acquiring those skills. And there came a point where it felt like, I think I have something to say here. I had written an article and felt like, I think I could say more about this, in fact. And it was also around a time when more and more people just weren't, it seemed like people just weren't communicating or connecting meaningfully for various reasons, political environment, technology usage, all the main, buzzwords, I think that we can all point to for leading to some sense of disconnection. And so it felt like a small way for me to help try to bridge that, disconnect a little bit by helping people with, some scripts that they could tweak to make their own, some thought starters, some ways to pay attention to their own listening, and then some of the techniques that I had learned in the UX research lab.
What did anything surprise you about the reception of the book or hearing from readers? Like, was it a different experience than you might have thought, or was it similar to what you thought? How did people take the book?
Yeah, I think that I would say that, it's funny. There was one person who I think his response surprised me, where he was like, this is so valuable. And also, I just struggle to see if this can really like break through. It wasn't a critique of my book or anything like that. It was just like, we're so culturally focused on talking that the idea of focusing on listening is like a little bit mind-boggling. And it's like, yeah, we are really culturally focused on, persuasion, influence, negotiation, like storytelling, all of those things. I think there's space, or we need to make some space for the listening piece. So that was one interesting reaction. But I think the people who were really drawn to the listening part, what was fun for me was seeing the various roles and backgrounds. So I heard from everybody from like, CEO types who were talking about listening in a corporate setting, to pastors who were talking about listening in, a spiritual setting, therapists, just, all of these different roles, which we kind of know if you stop to think about it, like, yes, listening is a huge part of what they do. But I think very rarely do we stop to think about how core it is to each of those roles, or even think about, how they learned those skills or any of that stuff. So that was fun for me.
I love that. I mean, one of the things that I think listening for me originally was almost a tool of navigating social environments. I've always been comfortable socially, but maybe my tools are so strong that I don't actually know how I really feel, because yesterday I had to go to two different social events that I was like, okay, I'll do this a parent thing, a neighborhood thing. And I find that when I go in just super ready to active listen, it always turns out well. I mean, if I'm just much more focused on the other person than myself, it's a basic get out of your head technique. Like, I am very soothed by listening to you talk. Like you have wonderful insights. I can learn from them. It's not all about me. I don't have to think about myself. Like, so I do think that listening as almost an emotional regulation tool is something that a lot of people don't get. And I think you are the spokesperson for that. So let's get into like the topic of the hour.
Okay.
Again,
Let's do it.
Rest Easy, which by the way, when I first saw it with its font, reminded me of the wonderful podcast Talk Easy, which I dream of you getting on at some point.
Oh man, that would
Sam
be really
is
beautiful.
amazing.
Yeah.
An amazing, but it has the same, and that's
You're
an
right.
amazing podcast with like a very calming intro, like thoughtful, great, insightful,
very good listener
conversations. Very good listener. But just the feeling of this book is so beautiful.
Thank you.
How did you work on the visuals? Or did were you partnering with a designer? Like this is as much a visual book as it is.
Yes. Yeah. So I really wanted the book to feel relaxing in some way. I wanted it to sort of like exude like ease and calm and peace, and not feel kind of like clunky or overly academic or like challenging in any way. I just wanted it to feel like a nice little gift for yourself or for someone else. And so early on, I thought about like the color palette. So there's greens, there's blues, there's purples, which are calming, cooling colors. So very different from my first book, which is like red, it's like attention grabbing. This is like, okay, we're here. We're just going to relax a little bit. I usually do the drawings. I think for my first book, I was sort of doing the drawings like as I was writing. I kind of knew
so
exactly.
This is all you. You did all the drawings.
Those are all me.
Okay,
yes,
I love that. I didn't realize that. That's amazing.
Yes. And for my first book, I kind of was able to do them in conjunction. Like, I could write during the day and do illustrations at night. I had a really strong sense of like what I need the illustrations to do. And this one, I sort of took my time with it. I think because whereas the first book is sort of written from the perspective of like, I have built this expertise, like, let me distill it for you. The second book is very much like, I am bad at resting. Like, that is why I am here. So I'm going to go on this journey and try and figure it out. And so the illustrations came a little bit later once I felt like I really kind of understood exactly what I was grappling with towards the end of that process. But yes, I worked with the designer on, layout and all that stuff.
That's
too.
cool though. I didn't realize you had done all the inlines. They're so cute. Like the little map of like the land. I love. Tell me, which of the 5 rest profiles are you? This is something I really liked in the book, is this idea of like people have these different sort of psychological approaches to rest, and they're clumped in these areas. I am guessing you are either a deprived or anti-rester, or you used to be. Is that true?
I would say that I'm a gold star rester. Yeah.
Okay. So rest only comes when they've completed their running to-do list for the day. It's a reward.
Yeah. Yes, right. It's a reward. I think that that's the sort of that's my starting point, and that's what I'm like working against. That's what I'm, slowly trying to change. But yeah, I think it's I am someone who is very achievement oriented. Like, it resonates. Wants the A+, wants the promotion, and like I am plagued by the to-do list. And so it is easy for me to say like, well, I can't relax until I do XYZ. Which I'm very much, trying to dismantle. And this book is part of that journey for sure.
I love that. I also marked in keeping with that same topic, productivity dysmorphia. This is something, has that ever had a name? Did you name it that?
I did not name it. A journalist, Anna Quagliarotto, named it that. And she basically describes it as, this, when you have this gulf between your objective experience and your subjective experience of an achievement. So it's like you've accomplished something, but it doesn't feel like an accomplishment. And it's like very easy to gloss over. And she talks about it as a combination, stemming from a combination of burnout, imposter syndrome, and anxiety, that it's some kind of mix of those that leads us to this place where we sort of can't see or feel or internalize that we've really truly achieved something.
That's really interesting, and it feels right on. In terms of like, it's very subtle to understand the feeling of accomplishment,
Mm.
and that the idea that it would not be tied to an actual accomplishment, that sometimes it's you're not feeling it. It's almost like you haven't completed the act of the accomplishment because you're not feeling it.
Well, I think it's
Um,
like the example I give in the book is when I published my first book. It's like a huge accomplishment. The second grade me, would have been like, this is so cool. Like you did the thing that you always wanted to do. But in the moment, I just remember thinking like, the day after launch, just being like, okay, well, so what now?
okay,
Like what's
I
next?
relate so much to what you're saying, and I don't know if that is maybe that's a gold star issue I have too, which is at some point I will feel this. At some point, maybe it'll be like a month after. Maybe I'm
Mm,
still in the thick of, you're in the middle of promotion. You're
mhm.
just starting that train. And so you can't really appreciate that it's done yet. But then it's sort of like, wait, but is it ever like, when do you
Yeah.
ever get to feel that? Or how does that ever come around?
Yeah. And I think, in this case too, it's like there are sort of traditional markers, I guess, of like when you should feel that way, when you should feel like, oh, I did the thing, it's like, I like the book is available, like you can buy it. Like it was in my head and now it's a thing that you can get. But yeah, I think it's still, there's something like surreal about that takes a little bit of time, um, and care and thoughtfulness to appreciate. And I think what I do, and so many of us do, is we just sweep right past that and we don't make the space to stop and go, I did something really hard. And like, I think I did a pretty good job of it. We just, again, it's like, it's the never ending to do list. We go, okay, well, all right, so that's launched. So what
Totally.
now?
Yeah, Snoop Dogg, I saw this little video where I think it's like a kind of popular little meme or a little like clip where he's like, I just want to thank myself for
Mm,
all the work I've been doing. And I want to thank myself. And I could see somebody sort of laughing at it, but I found it very inspiring. It's like
yeah.
he's like really clear. And sometimes you have to be depersonalized about it. Like, wow, the way you would treat someone else, right? Like, this is amazing. You did this book. This is so great. Now, if it were me, I'd still be like, it could have been, I could have worked more. It's
Yeah. Right.
always that
Right.
sort of hedginess around it.
Hmm.
What
Yeah.
is your dream? Like, who is your dream reader? Who would you most want to reach with this book?
I think I'm hoping to reach a few kinds of people. I think one is parents. I think that up until recently, I feel like when we talked about burnout, we were really exclusively talking about like office or like work related burnout, and we weren't at all thinking of like parenting as a kind of work or as a kind of thing that you could shockingly like be tired by. I think the pandemic has changed a little bit of that. There's more awareness of it. But so I think, yeah, like busy parents who are overworked, overtired, working
And
professionals
would
also.
your dream for their parents be like, look at some of the strategies in here. Like, actually really think about your limits. I don't know, like what action would you love to see
Yeah.
someone take?
I want anyone who reads the book to like find a thing, find a practice, find a technique that feels inviting, and that they can incorporate into their world. Because I think that certainly I had this assumption. I don't think I'm the only one. I think there's this idea that if you are tired or burnt out or, need a break, then, just stop working or just stop, doing the thing that is making you tired. And the reality is like, number one, a lot of us can't do that. Like that's just not an option. And number two, even if you can, that doesn't necessarily mean you walk away feeling rested. And so what I hope is that anyone who picks up the book can find a rest practice where they feel like, this is a thing I can do for myself. And it's not going to take up like a crazy amount of time. It's not going to be super expensive. It's going to be something simple that doesn't feel like a challenge, that feels like lovely, inviting, calming in some way.
How important do you think it is? One thing I noticed, and I was looking for the page, but I can't find the page, but you had this fantastic description of things that are activities that are actually restful,
Mm.
cognitive restful. And one was puzzling. And
Yes.
I was like, whoa, that's me. In between meetings, at times I
Oh,
have a
nice.
jigsaw puzzle upstairs. This is something that's happened within the past couple of years where I just realized just truly how relaxing it is
Mhm.
to switch gears and not be on a device, but to be doing something. And
Yes.
many crafts are like that as well. How important do you think it is that I say to myself, this is me resting? Like, do you think I actually get more rest? I think the answer is yes. By knowing what I'm doing.
I think that if it's something that you're working on, it probably matters more that you say it to yourself.
Yeah.
You know,
Like we almost have to tell ourselves, right?
yeah.
Or I should say, when I read this in the book, it
Did you
made
feel
me feel even
validated?
stronger. Like, oh,
Yeah.
there's a reason you're doing this. Like
Mm-hmm.
you've been doing it, but now here's why. Like this
Yeah.
really is providing that.
And I think a lot of us have those little things that we do that we can be a little bit dismissive of. Like,
Yes.
what is, I shouldn't be wasting
Yes.
time on this silly little puzzle. Like, I should be answering that email or
Yes.
whatever else it is. Um, and those things often, like, they're the first to go because we go
Yes.
back to the to-do list or whatever our focus is. But they're actually super valuable. You know, for you, it's puzzling. For me, like doodling or drawing, it just helps me to just kind of like empty out my brain a little bit,
Yes.
or just appreciate that my thoughts are all over the place and they're just going to be there for a minute, but I'm not working on a thing. And so I think, yeah, making space for those little moments, and appreciating them as doing something for us and not being frivolous. Yeah, I do think that's important.
The idea of sort of telling yourself this is why I'm doing this, I think this is the hard thing about the kind of work you and I both do, which is at times it can feel like you're saying something really obvious.
Mm-hmm.
Like rest.
Yeah.
Rest is important, rest.
Yes.
But helping someone get over the leap of just hearing what that is and actually internalizing and understanding it. And I am kind of getting to a question, which is how do you help yourself make sense of encouraging, like you'll see it, you mentioned nap ministry, you see it all over social media about the importance of rest as resistance, rest is important. How do you how do you help someone get from this like theoretical, yeah, I hear it
Mm.
everywhere, into no, really, this is worth
Yeah.
continued thinking about?
I think for me, the fastest way to sort of like prove that it's valuable is to like think about your worst days and your best days. And probably rest has something to do with that. When I am not rested, if I have not gotten a good night's sleep because, the dog was barking at something or my kid woke me up in the middle of the night or whatever, um, I'm not just like grumpy in the morning. Like I'm definitely grumpy in the morning, but also like I'm just like not as good at life. You know what I mean? Like I'm not bringing
Yes.
my best self forward, whether that's in a work context or an interpersonal context. I don't have as much empathy or generosity or kindness or focus or attention, any of those things. Whereas when I'm rested, whatever that means, whether it's, a good night's sleep or making time to clear out your thoughts so that you can, concentrate on the day ahead. When you do have those moments of rest, like I think it's actually a pretty obvious difference, and a really positive difference, but we usually don't pay attention to that. Like we kind of take those days for granted. And
Yes.
also, if we haven't had them in a while, we forget about them and we're like, well, this is just my new normal now. Like, I just need another cup of coffee. You know what
You're
I
right.
mean?
You're right. Again,
And
it's that
yeah.
articulation to yourself. Like this actually, you hear it all the time, but breathing actually is important. You hear it all
Right.
the time, but rest actually is important. And I feel like the step between theoretical, everyone's talking about this, and the actually doing it, implementing it, is the space you're living in.
Mm-hmm.
And it is a hard space to be in. I remember when I was starting Beautiful Voyager and I was like, the challenge, I'm trying to reach the me's who don't know that they have an anxiety disorder. How
Mm,
do you reach someone that doesn't know and
right.
kind of doesn't want to know necessarily? Like, how the heck was I 40 years old and I didn't know? You know, it's like,
Yeah,
obviously I had not been listening or didn't reach me. It's hard to reach the people that are
totally.
actually the difficult to reach ones.
Yeah. And I think, you were asking me earlier, like, who is this for? And like, I can give you a few sort of like audience demographics, but also, yeah, it's for me. It's for me and it's for the me's. Like,
Agree.
that is
Agree.
why I wrote the book. And so I think like when I think about the kind of book that I want, it's, I need something that's not going to push me further into my type A tendencies. I need something that's going to like give me just enough to work with, but also be playful enough and whimsical enough where it's a little bit of a choose your own adventure, where you're not making rest another chore. Because the last thing I want to do for anyone is to add another item on their to-do list, which is like, well, now you have to rest. Like, that's not the goal. So I do think, I think what I'm trying to do is share stories so that people know they're not alone, like that this is like quite common, and then give you a sort of like treasure chest of tools. And then you get to play and you get to figure out what feels hokey, what feels like totally not you, what feels like really aligned with like who you are and your lifestyle and your personality. And it's going to look different for everyone. And I love that.
I think that's so well said. You and I are in such a similar space because the visual element helps someone feel. And that's
Yeah.
the thing, is like engaging the feeling. And it's a really hard thing to do with only words. I mean, certainly poets are
Mhm.
able to do it, but it is a hard thing to do with only words. So it's nice that we also have design, and
Yes.
your drawings are amazing for that too.
Thank you.
What was your process? We're almost done, by the way. You've been
Okay.
amazing. This is still early on in your book tour.
Thank you.
um, how did your experience and process of writing your second book differ from your first one? She asked, as if she may have special interest in that.
Well, I am so excited to hear about that. Yes, very different. I think the word that I would choose for describing the second book process was just like sane. The first one was insane because the first book
Full-time
I
job.
was full-time job, writing a book on the side, like pregnant and then newborn, pandemic, George Floyd, just like everything,
Yeah.
all of those things happening. So this was way more sane because this was what I was focusing on.
Yep.
I deliberately like left the 9 to 5 to make space for this kind of thing. So yeah, it just felt like much more easeful. I mean, basically I was running a lot of personal experiments. Like I
Yep.
was tired and I wanted to feel,
Yep.
more energy. So I was like,
I love
okay,
it.
well, like, let me read about, how people have done this before, or what do the psychologists have to say about this? Like, is there something that I can take away from these
And
learnings?
what would you say is an example of one of your biggest activity changes, or what have you done
Mm.
differently as a result?
I mean, this is going to sound a little bit ironic given where we started the conversation, but I have started reading fiction again. Like I used to read so much
That.
fiction and then I stopped for at least a decade,
Yep.
and was like only writing nonfiction. And so I was reading nonfiction. And then I started reading fiction again. And now it's like part of my
Me too.
bedtime routine. It's
Same.
a way for
Same.
me to not look at my screen. It gives me something else to do. I love it. I have like way more interesting dreams. Also, I don't know if you find this, but I feel like plot points like
Agree.
do their
Yes.
thing.
Yes. And it
Yeah.
gives me a
So
lot more patience.
mm,
Um, I think this was a tool I used when I was a kid growing up reading so much fiction. Was it helped me not be as mad
mm,
that I was different, or that I don't know. It just helped me be more accepting of like a wide variety of human experiences.
mhm.
If I thought, oh, this person's story, I understand these stories. Like, imagine what
Yeah.
is behind this angry person in the I'm not saying I can always do it, but like if you're trying to park a car and someone else is being horrible, and I don't know, like
Yeah,
road rage, try like thinking about it as a novel is very helpful for me in terms of acceptance.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it's a huge empathy builder
Yes,
where, you get to,
absolutely.
you're in somebody else's brain and, kind of seeing their thoughts in a way that you, you basically only get to do that with your brain, which gets kind of tiring.
Totally.
So
Totally. Any final thoughts for overthinkers? That's who my people are. Overthinkers, people pleasers, perfectionists. Anything you would love them to know or that you've been thinking about?
yeah, I think that, there's a whole section in the book that's about resting your mind, which I feel like is most appropriate here. Anytime that your thoughts are running or you can't get a grip on them. There's a couple of techniques, but I think the one that I have found resonating is psychological distancing. So when you're kind of stuck in that rut and probably not being very kind to yourself, or just kind of regretting a conversation or how that went, or berating yourself for like, I should have said that instead of this. Just, speaking kindly to yourself and with self-compassion, and using your first name. So going like, Ximena, like you did the best you could. And that's great. As opposed to sticking with the first person of like, I did a bad job.
Yeah, I
Like,
love that one. And
that
that's a
shift I
little bit
think
of
is
the Snoop
important.
Dogg, right? Like, I
Yeah,
want to thank
exactly.
Snoop Dogg for doing this. It was
Right.
amazing. Like, so
Yeah,
good.
totally.
Well, thank you so much for your time today. Thank you for letting me be one of the first to interview you with this new book,
Yay.
Rest Easy. Discover calm and abundance through the radical power of rest. Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much
much
for
for
writing
having
it
me.
too.
Thank you.